You are listening to the Practicing People's Podcast. I'm CJ Hammond.
And I'm Jordan White. Together, we'll be taking a journey into the practices that help us align with our mind, body, and soul.
So take a deep breath, release, and remain curious as we explore new ways to enhance our lives. All right, welcome back to the Practicing People's Podcast. We are so honored today to have Dr. Corey Emmanuel, who is a friend of mine, but just one of the most amazing humans that has blended it now into his career. And we will dive into his practices, about what makes him great and what allows him to prosper in his career. So a little bit about Corey to begin this. So Dr. Corey Emmanuel hails from the quaint town of Anderson, South Carolina, where as an only child, he found solace and inspiration in reading books, writing essays, and watching lots of television and film. Early on, he discovered his voice through participation in book clubs, writing competitions, and delivering speeches, culminating in the creation of his debut children's book, Can I Be President Too?, in 2012. During his graduation studies at Columbia University, where he earned a master's degree in communication, Corey immersed himself in the world of media production as an editorial trainee for the docuseries Black in America at CNN. This experience ignited his passion for storytelling and led him to embark on a journey to Los Angeles to pursue his career in edutainment. Driven by a relentless curiosity about the impact of mass media on human behavior, Corey pursued further education, earning a PhD in media psychology in 2014. Today, Dr. Corey is a prominent media psychologist, thought leader, and advocate for mental wellness based in Los Angeles. He has graced the stage as an expert on esteemed platforms like nationally syndicated Tamron Hall Show and serves with pride as a board member of the National Association of Black Journalists. Corey is also the creative force behind the web series Lend Me Your Lens, lauded in Black Enterprise magazine, and the visionary behind the social media movement Men Talking Shift. In 2024, Dr. Corey will make his debut as TEDx speaker. His expertise makes him a sought-after podcast guest, lecturer, media commentator, moderator, and consultant in both the technology and entertainment sectors. Driven by profound commitment to leverage media and psychology to raise the collective consciousness through enlightenment and empowerment, Dr. Corey Emmanuel continues to inspire and transform lives across the globe. Beautiful words, and there could be more even said, but welcome, Dr. Corey Emmanuel.
Thank you so much, brother. So happy to share this space with both of you.
It is
Yeah,
beautiful.
same, man. We are so blessed to have you here, and clearly a decorated resume there. So thank you for making the time, and we're really looking forward to our conversation. So, as we start to just kind of settle into this space, we'd love to hear a little more about who you are, maybe on the personal side. There's a lot of accolades there that we talked about. How about on the personal side?
Sure. I am definitely a little country Black boy who had some very big dreams growing up. And I can honestly say, although not easy, I am very proud of the life that I built for myself. Certainly could not have done it without amazing parents, my tribe, and great friends like CJ, to cheer me on every step of the way. But really, I would say the journey to becoming who I am really started in childhood. And I say that because I grew up in a very tumultuous dynamic, a lot of adverse experiences. My dad was a drug addict and an alcoholic while I was in my mom's belly. And that went on to about the age of 6, and saw some disturbing things and definitely dealt with some trauma there. And by age 8, my mother had enough. And so then I had to ride the wave of divorce, separating, moving away. But she held it down. I have a very, very strong mom. And thankfully, my dad was able to get clean, and we've been able to repair our relationship over the years. I think me and my dad have kind of become best friends now. He calls me every day on his way home from work. And my mom and I, of course, have the strongest bond I think a mother and son could possibly have as a result of everything we've been through together. So those were really sort of those formative years that, as you can probably imagine, was shaping a young psychologist, was creating a lot of curiosity to learn through the media, because as an only child, particularly growing up in the South, you're somewhat limited to role models, and you just have a lot of questions that your parents are sometimes just busy growing up themselves that they can't quite answer. And so those were those initial moments in my life that I believe was planting the seed for me to become the man that I am today.
Mm. That's incredible. I'm curious. Many people consume, one of the things that now in your career you do is sort of dissect media, and you were a consumer for a long time, perhaps without awareness, but it seems to be as if I'm not mistaken, and please correct me if I'm wrong, there's always been a keen awareness to you of this consumption somehow has an effect on my mind, body, and soul in some way. In your formative years, was that something that you grasped, or was that not until later on in your life that you said, wow, media is really impacting the way I see the world, the way I interact with other humans, my family, my dynamics? When did that awareness begin to take shape? Was it in that young age?
Absolutely. I have often said in other interviews that so much of who I am, particularly as a creative, was born out of the imagination that television and film gave me the permission to have. I was seeing worlds and characters that were way beyond the scope of what I was experiencing in my little small hometown. And I will say that, and I talk about this in a book that I am working on, and my agent will hopefully uh, get me a contract for soon to share with all the listeners. But one of the very first shows that had a huge mark on my life was A Different World. And for those who may not know, that show really follows a group of black, young people going through the college experience. And so that was one of the first things that planted the seed of higher education. Being able to see black professors be deans, and seeing young people go through the journey of balancing education with real life experiences. And so that certainly was. I'm enjoying this show a little bit more than maybe the cartoons. And so that definitely left a very strong impression on me. And again, as I look throughout my life, earning a bachelor's, earning two masters, and then a PhD, certainly there was something in those early years of seeing education being prioritized amongst people who looked like me that then led me to sort of adopt that same sort of trajectory, I think. So, yeah, it started early. I don't think I had the language to know it was shaping me in such a profound way. But as I got older, I was like, oh, that's where that started. And so, yeah, and I could pull from other examples, Mr. Rogers, Sesame Street. Those were some of the earliest memories I have of television and film really shaping my mind.
Yeah, it's amazing. Just your awareness, as CJ pointed to, of your journey, right? And what's been impactful and what's been inspiring and what's, kind of woken up your curiosity, if you will. What I took away from that, Corey, is I wonder if you have thought about, or if you've heard that you have kind of this ability to really listen to yourself. I mean, it seems like that's a big part of who you are. Is that fair to say? Or
It absolutely is. And, we're on the practicing podcast. So I have to say that probably my most effective practice that started very early derived from me being an only child, and that is solitude. I think that we live in a world that is constantly hungry for validation outside of ourselves. And not to say that I haven't struggled with that or still struggle with that, but there was something happening in those early years of, oh, it's just me. Mom's working two jobs. Dad's dealing with his own struggles. I may be staying with my grandparents. They're older. They're not as, active and involved in my life. I got to figure out some things on my own. So that practice started very early. Now, I've had to do the work over the years to make solitude more impactful, not just, okay, I'm just sitting with myself. Okay, but what does reflection look like? What does meditation look like in those quiet times? Even fostering my relationship with music in my solitude, all of that has been healing at times, calming at times. Just opened up my solitude has opened up my world to be more sensitive to others in a lot of ways. So it's really interesting that you picked up on that.
Wow. That's now here we go. It's going to get going because there's so much I pick up from that. That in your solitude, it really allows for you to authentically then, when you choose to come out of your solitude and bring the authenticity of your world that is distinctly Corey, that is your source, that is your energy. And I'm just curious, that solitude, was it ever an issue or hard to find where it felt like this is far from the norm? This is something that I don't see others doing? Or has solitude, even being an only child, been something that took to quite easily, but then understood, oh, my intuition comes from this, which is very rooted in my authenticity?
You just hit the nail on the head. I think in those early years, I'm gonna say like 6, 7, I wanted friends and cousins to come over to the house as much as possible. I wanted to go over to their house. I had to get comfortable with my solitude. Being an only child, you definitely have those years where it just feels lonely. Like there's nothing glamorous about not having anybody to play video games with and go outside and climb trees with. So I had to work through just the sort of natural childhood development aspects of being an only child. But I think I learned probably by early middle school that I was developing this power that a lot of my friends who had big families and, even if they didn't have a lot of other siblings, maybe grandparents lived in the house with them, there was some type of dynamic that I was like, oh, I get to go and refill in a way and pour into myself in a way that most people don't have the luxury of doing. So I did start to make that discovery in middle school. And I think that what's interesting about it is that ultimately my peers started to pick up on that too. And so they wanted to come over to the house more. They were like, and my mom, she teases me to this day. She said, we were living in this small little 2 bedroom, 1 bath house, and you'd have 6 or 7 people piled up in your bedroom. And she's like, I never understood like why. But I think to your point, CJ, I was creating an energy or a space around me in my solitude that was very appealing to other people. They saw something in that they're like, what's he do? Like, what does his world look like? And how do I get a piece of that? And I would say that even followed me into college. Once I became an RA, my room just became the gathering spot that people wanted to be in. I remember when 9/11 happened, same scenario, 8, 10 people piled up in my dorm room. They were like, Corey, how do we make sense of this? Even though we weren't in New York, we were still, impacted, even vicariously through what was happening. So yeah, I have followed that theme of, okay, let me go get my solitude, let me refill, let me reset so that I can be of greater service to others.
Yeah, that's amazing. And Corey and I were talking a little bit earlier about, kind of recognizing each other's energy in one another too. And, it was a little later for me, Corey. So it's so inspiring to hear that you picked up on maybe some of these are my words, right? Like introversion traits where that's how you recharge the battery, right? And that's not for everyone, right? Some people love to go and be out and about, be super social, and that's how they recharge. So um, it sounded like, though, through that process that you got really in touch with your inner spirit, right? And that's maybe what people were really attracted to. Like what is that? So I'm just curious, are there any practices in particular that you picked up along the way, whether it be throughout your childhood or college or even post, that have helped you be really connected with yourself?
Sure. I'll start with the most obvious that, some people might, when you first hear it, sort of question or second guess, but television and film. Again, you got to go back to thinking Corey is by himself a lot, so how does he foster a sense of joy? How does he process what he's feeling without somebody else being there to sort of guide him through it? And so I use this even in my social media today, where I talk about the therapeutic qualities of certain television shows, and even though, again, I was finding that language to even describe that, I Boy Meets World, I'll use that as an example. That was one of my childhood shows that I really, really liked. And you think about, and it's funny because the lead's name was Corey, so maybe there's something to that too. But you think about Boy Meets World, a young adolescent boy trying to figure out life, trying to figure out relationships, working things out with his best friend, the neighbor, stepping in to offer sage advice. I found that show to be really therapeutic to me as an only child. So one of the modalities that I absolutely use for my own sort of therapeutic relief is television and film. And again, I started that at a very early age. As I got older, though, journaling was also very, very crucial to me because, again, I think something happens a lot of times as an only child as well, that you don't know if, am I the only one feeling this way? And so to safeguard your thoughts and your feelings, is easier sometimes to put them on paper than to always just blurt them out to other people. And so that practice started early for me too. I had a diary. I know people don't really use that term anymore, but like I legit kept diaries that I would use to journal in. I grew up in the church, and I would say I grew up religious. I did, but even I would say around undergrad is where I sort of departed from being what I would say, quote unquote, religious and more spiritual. But part of my spiritual practices was birthed through religion and being so active in church. I was really involved in church growing up. And so prayer and meditation are still integral to my everyday, you know, centering myself. It's how I start my day. So those three things, I would say: television and film, the journaling, as well as the prayer and meditation, are like, that's what fuels me every single day.
Mm. I know we're all believers in meditation in this group. What the powers it is. I'm curious as you talk about your practices and knowing now how deeply we've become friends. Me and Corey have been friends for 7-8 years now almost. And I'm curious because I've gotten to see your growth, the intersectionality between your personal journey and the practices that you've aligned with in your personal life, intersecting with the social media psychology. Can you explain a little bit about what it is now in your career that you do now? Because I feel like it's such a fascinating and so important at this time with so many different outlets, with the TikToks, the Instagram, but also every streaming platform in this, how the world and the practices that you take allow you to bring awareness to what we're consuming on the daily. So please just speak a little bit about exactly what you do in your career day to day and how it kind of blends with those practices.
Sure, sure. And I'll start with just a very simple definition, because oftentimes people ask me, "Well, what is media psychology?" We've heard of and we've lived psychology throughout our entire lives, but that term media psychology is really still emerging. Although it's been around now and part of the APA, I would say, for probably near 20 years now. But just short definition of media psychology is studying how, say, television, film, social media, technology, all of these facets of media, how they impact human behavior, right? And from there, you can go off in a million different directions. And so many of my colleagues and associates rather, they do that. We all have our own little niche. For me, again, full circle moment, following the things of your life, or following the themes of my life is what led me to media psychology. So you got to think about, I will be 42 years old this year. I was born in 1982. I was the first of all of the things, really, if you think about MySpace, Facebook. I was there for the onset, AOL dial up. I was there and lived through the onset of all of those things at an age that it was really marketed to me, if you think about it. Like, so there was already this thing happening. And by the time I got to graduate school, I was really, really intrigued by the intersection of psychology and technology. I had taken some undergraduate courses, and so one of the graduate courses that was offered just as a extra, curriculum kind of moment was the psychology of media. I was like, really intrigued by that. Got in there and it just completely rocked my world. I was like, wait, there does need to be people that's going to help us make sense of these continuous developments that are going to happen, and I won't give too much away, but I talk about this in my TED talk that I'm going to give in August. I ask everybody, what's the first thing you do in the morning? And it's typically we grab our phones. What's one of the last things you do, if not the last thing, before you go to bed at night? You typically look at your phone. So that mobile device has so much power, in our lives. Now, we get the opportunity to decide how we're going to make use of it and what role and to what degree it's going to play in our lives, but I think it's important to have people that can help us make sense of the complexity of technology and the internet and everything that falls under it.
Jordan, if I can piggyback off this really quickly, because it's crazy that you just or it works so well that you talked about how you found yourself was in your solitude at a very early age. And now at a very early age, children have the chance to have solitude, but many times intersecting with that is this tool that is a phone at the beginning of the day, or an iPad, a pad. So those chances that you had to find yourself in moments of reflection and stuff, now we're sort of, that space shrinks because now we have it filled with something else and avoidant. It is just a tool, but it seems that that tool is meant to take up the space to get someone's brain to focus on something now. So I found that very sort of alarming too, because the character that you developed came from those moments of introspection that were not filled with anything, maybe some TV, but it wasn't this ever flowing field of internet, TV, phone stuff. So I just found that to be so crazy as I thought about how you found yourself with what's going on today. So that's why it's ever so important to really talk about what we're talking about today.
Yeah. And you bring up a really valid point for any of the parents listening. I'm very careful to first of all acknowledge I don't have kids. But I do have nieces and nephews who are very young. I do a lot of work in youth development. CJ and I have worked in that space together. And so I never blame parents at all for the ways in which they might allow their kids to use technology. But I do invite parents to first look at their own relationships with social media, their cell phones, because we are constantly setting an example for them. And it's probably one of the biggest areas of grievances for me when I go home and I visit my nieces and nephews, and it's like pulling teeth to get them away from these devices to have a conversation. And so I have found ways, and I invite parents and guardians and folks to do this as well. Is if we know the tablet isn't going away, right? It's been there since the time they came out of the womb. They're in love with it. It's their BFF. It's all these things. How can you meet them where they are? So like with my little niece, I was just home a few weeks ago, and she and we played educational games. We'd pause it, we talk about moments that were happening during the game, right? So that it isn't babysitting them, right? Or it's not feeding them things that won't help them develop into whole, intelligent, mentally healthy children, right? So you got to find ways, and there's a whole, you can get lost in all of the recommendations of really positive gaming and educational and social and emotional learning games that are available. But I invite our listeners, if that's been a struggle for you, if you kind of feel this sense of, I wish I could do something different, or what can I do? Trust me, you're not alone in that. So again, we want to remove the shame if that's sort of been the journey of you and your child and technology. But I really do invite you for look for ways to meet them where they are in this technology, digital driven, era, in ways that you can join them and show them, be their first role model, example of putting that phone down at dinner. Or, you get to a point, you answer a few emails, maybe once you get home, then you're done with emails for the day. So they don't constantly see you on that phone, because you really are their most comprehensive role model.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, CJ. I mean, it's so, so, so important. And something you bring up there, Corey, really appreciate you talking about beginning with yourself, right? And really thinking about what's my relationship, and what I heard it in a just an open and honest way, like almost kind of looking at yourself from a distance and just being really truthful with yourself. So I'm just wondering if you have any um, uh, tips or ideas you want to share around someone who's maybe thinking about adjusting their relationship, or becoming more honest with their relationship with media at large. Social media obviously is very addicting. It's a bigger topic. So just curious if you have any just thoughts that would be helpful for listeners to think about.
Yeah. So I'll start with probably a question that I've gotten asked a lot over the years is, is social media making me depressed? And I present that to our listeners because I often say, first of all, no, it's not making you depressed, but it is inviting you to think about and sit with what emotions you might be having before you get to social media. Okay. Because, for example, if you are already dealing with some self esteem issues, right? And they may be under the surface. Maybe it's not a big prevalent thing in your life, but there's some, we're human. So we all have some areas where we sometimes think about, oh, I could make an improvement there or two. If you're already having those thoughts circulating, and you get on social media and you see somebody demonstrating a life, although it might be an illusion, demonstrating a life that is appealing to you, or that is then making you second guess yourself, or maybe I could be doing more. That's not social media's fault, right? That's about getting really honest about with yourself about, oh, I do have some areas of improvement. Maybe it's diet, maybe it's fitness, maybe it's career. But instead of just surrendering to that feeling, right? The first things first is acknowledge, oh, this does make me uncomfortable. Oh, yeah, this is bringing up some really tough feelings for me before. Then going down the path of naming that thing. So, for example, I just shared a video a couple of days ago where two friends were just talking about how taking I feel like out of our statements, right? I feel like blank, right? Oftentimes we will attribute that to what somebody else has done to us. Again, using the social media example of social media making me depressed, or what you did made me feel this way. Instead of letting that drive your thought and drive your heart space, instead unpacking the layers to what's coming up for you, right? Because there may be some dormant anger issues from when you were bullied as a child, right? There may be some dormant issue of you were abandoned by a parent when you were younger, right? So I invite folks that I do any sort of like mental health, even when CJ and I, when we go for a hike or something, I'm always trying to encourage myself and others to go a layer below what feels like the obvious, and so that's something that I put into my daily practice, and when I'm talking to other people, is to try to relinquish this notion of blaming the first thing that comes up for you. It might be a partner you're with, and so they're the easiest scapegoat because they're there. And it's like, actually, no, you're not doing that to me. Social media isn't doing that to me. There's some things there's some underlying emotional issues that I need to address. And that might then require some time off social media. That might require curating the people that you're following in a different way, right? That might even mean setting reminders to say, all right, no social media use during this time. So there is some intersectionality between how you're feeling and what might be being presented to you on social media. But that blame game of just directly saying this is it, whether it's with social media or another person, that's not really a healthy coping mechanism for going through life.
Yeah. Everybody needs to go on a hike with Corey. Okay, schedule your. I get the opportunity to, but the thing that just came to my mind was blaming versus naming, and what's more helpful, right? The naming of what that is going to lead to tracing the cord back to the wall and find out if it's plugged in or not. And oftentimes, it's wild that you say these things because I'm reminded of I reflect upon how detrimental it can be to my days. I'll go in feeling great, come off booking a movie, filming a movie, come back in, and then town goes cold for a couple weeks, and you see someone else booking it on set, and you're like, "Am I? Has my? I'm nothing now." And all of a sudden, somehow, my worth has diminished, and that's the actual cost of it. We act like it's this big, sort of like shield up that's up, but it's something that's deeper than that. It's my self-worth is diminished, and we talk about depression that you alluded to. That's where you start to feel depressed when you have no self-worth that's coming, and you don't feel worthy of the next breath, the next opportunity that comes your way, because it goes to them and it's nothing. And oftentimes in my life, I'm blaming, and it's so helpful to hear you say that, and then think, if I'm naming something rather than blaming something, I might be able to find a little bit more resolve, and be able to feel better about my interaction, because it is a choice. We choose to do it often, get up on it. This is harmless. This is harmless. But like you said, without awareness, all of a sudden CJ's self-worth has diminished almost to like, I need a conversation with Jordan or Corey, because I don't know who I am anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And you're speaking to what happens when we give our power over to anything, right? It becomes this you start to spiral. It's an immediate spiral when you forget that you get to make that choice. You can in everything. We can go beyond social media at this point, that you get to make that choice. One of my favorite quotes is, your life is the sum result of the choices you make. And mind you, there are life circumstances way beyond us, beyond our control. None of us are in control. Let's be very clear about that. But there's a lot of choice if you think about your day to day life, and those choices obviously carry a lot of weight. So we're speaking the same language.
Jordan, I know you know
Oh,
what to say
so
next, because about those choices, man.
Yeah,
yeah. I mean, we've talked about it a few times on the show, with guests, but one of the big part of one of the core pieces, if not the core piece of self leadership, the program that I take people through, is what we call the central question, and is, what choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? And to your point, Corey, if we're asking that more consistently, it's not that you have to stop and do that for every single decision, right? Like, but if we're not conscious about what we're up to, it's easy to get taken away from who we are. And that's a lot of what I heard you say there too, is we get what we think about. So to your point, CJ, if we're like, damn, like why am I not getting any love? Why this? Why not XYZ? That usually perpetuates, right? So I'm just curious, Corey, if you could speak to maybe even the psychology of that, and a little bit of as far as kind of what's going on in our mind, as far as if we get what we think about, really is what kind of the way to sum it up. Just curious if you have any thoughts on that.
Sure. So, at the there's a renowned psychologist, Maslow, and if anybody's familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we know that belonging is sort of at the top of the pyramid, right? It's that thing that all humans have a psychological need for belonging, right? That's like sort of the big ultimate goal, belonging and self actualization, right? Those are peak living your best life, right? And so oftentimes I find when we talk about the choices and the decisions that we're making on a day-to-day basis, it's all about feeling seen, feeling heard, and do I matter? Like, we can just, if we all really started to dissect whatever's coming up for us right now in our life, we can probably connect it back to belonging, and then this sort of subset or of, do I feel seen, do people hear me, and do I matter? You know what I'm saying? And I think also, to CJ's point, when we talk about the career piece, depending on your background, you're trying to build a legacy. You're trying to make things better for those who came behind you. Maybe you witnessed your parents struggle and you want to make a better life for them before they leave this world. So there's a lot of things at play when we think about our motivational pursuits in life. And so, Jordan, to your point, the psychology behind it is really getting clear about who you are and why do I want what I want. You know what I'm saying? Like that for me, I would say, now being in my early 40s, that was the biggest sort of story arc of my 30s, is really getting clear about who am I and why do I want what I want? Because, okay, yeah, there's some things that I want, but why do I want that? And I think that for me, I found that my pursuits really are rooted in one, trying to make a better life for me, but also trying to make a better life for other people, And so I think we have to get really clear about our goals, about our motives, because when you don't, life can be very chaotic and you will sort of grasp for whatever it is that's sort of being thrown your way. But if you have this level of awareness and something to check in with yourself on, right? That's why it's so clear, going back to the journaling earlier, all of this stuff really is tied in together if you think about it, right? You've when you write, you're becoming clearer with your thoughts. You can go back and revisit a vision that you've written for yourself and give yourself grace as you evolve and may want to adjust some things, right? So that's what the psychology of it is, like, really. We want to be seen, we want to be heard, we want to feel like we belong. We have motivational pursuits in our life that sort of take us on different paths. That's why everybody's path is different. We all have different desires and goals. And so at the end of the day, you just got to get really, really clear about who you are and why you want what you want. And nobody can tell you that. There's no magic wand. There's no manual to say, "Oh, Jordan, you should do this and that. This is the way to get there." Or, CJ, "Oh, you want this? Beautiful. Well, if you just do A, B, and C, then this." No. But that's where it starts. You've got to get really, really clear
Yeah.
with your goals.
Getting clear can become it can be a challenge too if you're not sure where your footing is. I think that if you think about the way I consume social media is in my 20s versus now here in my mid 30s, really something that through my conversations with you and Jordan and other friends, our values change. I used to be probably and everybody can be guilty of it, but more materialistic. But the question be presented to self: what value does this add? So what's curated to me in my social media now often more so aligns with spiritual practices, learning, growth, things of that pattern. Whereas before, cars, clothes, in the 20s, women, whatever it was, those things back then versus what it is now, my values have changed, which I love, but it took this I was on unsolid ground for a while because I'm like, well, who is this? This isn't
Yeah.
why am I not like this guy anymore? Like, again, I don't belong in this group anymore. Well, where do I belong? You've leveled up
Yeah.
perhaps.
Well, and I would argue, you tell me if I'm wrong, that you life feels better as a result of the shifts that you've just sort of naturally evolved into, right? Like going back to when I mentioned Maslow before, belonging being at the top of the pyramid, where there's some more extrinsic things down below. There's some the car, the house, that the house is just like, security, safe haven, things like that. But yeah, you're speaking to a very natural evolution that hopefully most people go through throughout their lives. And as you go through that evolution, it's only natural that there are going to be shifts and adjustments that you make. I think it's sort of scary if sometimes the same things that appeal to you at 20 still appeal to you at 40. Not judging anybody, but yeah, there should, as you grow and evolve, there should be examples. There should be some tangible things that come along with that evolution. So I love hearing that. And I'm same for me. Like I think about sometimes it's cringe worthy to go back, or Facebook will remind you of something you posted and you're like, what? Like that? But again, I give myself grace. That was that version of me,
Yeah.
but thankfully we all grow and mature in our own unique ways.
Amen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man, thank you for speaking so eloquently to embracing change, right? And embracing that nothing is permanent, even within us, right? And I appreciate you bringing it up too, CJ, as far as having the reflection time of like, wow, some things are different here. And Corey, I'm not sure if you notice this at all, but it seems like there's almost this like loyalty to that person that you are at times, where
Mhm.
sometimes people may start to feel stuck in life, like, well, I can't change, right? Like I got to be who I am, I got to keep it 100 or whatnot. And I'm just curious if you've noticed that at all, kind of in the work that you're doing, as far as people staying so committed to maybe who they were 5 years ago, as opposed to really just embracing change in an open way that we're talking about here.
Yeah. Well, it's I can't make just a blanket statement. Just in I'll start with myself first, right? Is as a psychologist, you have just a certain moral and ethical way that you show up in the world, right? You want people to feel like that you're a safe space, that they can open up and be vulnerable to you and all of that, right? And I remember talking to another therapist recently, and he was saying that several years ago in his practice, he had to set some really hard boundaries around who he would see as clients, because he's like, I'm gonna go out to the club every once in a while. And so me being out having fun and having a couple of drinks, I would rather those people not be a client of mine, because I want there to be this line, this delineation. I want there to be this distinction of like, yes, this is me as a psychologist, as the therapist who sees clients and helps them in really profound ways. But also there's a version of me who, yeah, I'm still a psychologist, but I'm off duty right now. And I'm just enjoying my life. And I'm not trying to talk about any trauma. I'm not trying to do, and I should have the right to do that,
Yep.
right? To create this balance for me in my life. And so I think everybody has to find that for themselves and not get sort of caught up in whatever persona that you've created for social media. And I think that there's merit to that, right? Most people will use Instagram, for example. Instagram can be a really great calling card. I tell my clients who I coach with branding that, like, you should have a really strong sort of short bio on your Instagram page, because that's your elevator pitch a lot of times before people ever get a chance to meet you, if they get to meet you at all. I'll have journalists and folks that have reached out to me over the years, and they say, I typed in media psychologist and you were the first person that came up. So yeah, that's great. But for me, the balance is, I'm not always Dr. Corey, the media psychologist. I don't always want to be Dr. Corey, the media psychologist. That's part of me, and I can't completely eliminate that side of me, but I also want to set boundaries around expectations for, I'm a man figuring things out. I'm going to fumble the ball. I'm going to make mistakes. And so I think it's important for people to find that for themselves and know that you don't have to be this monolithic person 24/7, because it's not realistic and it's not fun for you to
Right.
always feel like you've got to fit inside this little perfect box. Yeah.
Wow, that's
But I see that in other people, and because I think you were also asking me about what I'm observing and I'm witnessing,
Sure.
is that there's a pivot that happens. Younger folks, CJ, great example, what you were saying earlier. Some of the 20-year-old folks who are sort of like mentees now, which is so hard to believe. I see the struggle. I see them trying to figure it out. And of course, I impart wisdom. I talk about my own journey, but you really have to just go through it.
Yep.
You just have to go through all of those growing pains and arrive on the other side of that thing. And I think that that's sort of the beautiful part about life, right? Is that you get to go on your own unique journey and figure out things in divine timing.
to your point. That's so beautifully said, and I think something that goes in hand with that is that's why social media can be detrimental, because your mile markers are set literally to someone else's mile markers, your milestones, and life is authentically yours, and your journey is so personal and individual. So to set up your rating system based upon someone else's life is illogical, but so often we do find ourselves doing that.
Sure. Well, going back to Jordan's question about a psychology of some of the stuff that we're talking about. So there's a construct called upward comparison. And I know you guys both are sports folks, played sports, still play sports. But we take somebody like Kobe or Michael Jordan or Steph Curry or Venus and Serena. We can go down the list of all these people. There is nothing wrong with seeing someone with amazing qualities, strengths, talents that you admire, and trying to emulate that on some level. You might remember as kids, we had the Like Mike campaign, right? Everybody was trying to be like Michael Jordan, play like Michael Jordan. That may have worked out for some kids. They're very sure there are a lot of NBA players right now who discovered Michael Jordan is up at 5 a.m. practicing every morning. He's in the gym for 2 hours. I'm gonna do that. And now they're reaping the rewards of that, putting that practice into place. So that's what we mean by upward comparison. So I tell people when we talk about social media and its influence and its impact, I'm like, if you can harness the good out of social media by some of the role models and the folks that you put into place, it can really do some amazing things for you. There are older psychologists, the Gottmans are an example, who have been at this game of psychology for many, many years. Of course, they have inspired me and inspired my journey and some of my pursuits in some really beautiful ways. So it's not all bad. But to CJ's point, if you're finding yourself comparing yourself to somebody and you constantly feel this sense of defeat, I'm not enough, it starts activating imposter syndrome for you. That's when you've got to take a step back and still remember what I said earlier, not immediately blaming that person or that thing or that post as the culprit for now why you're depressed.
Mhm.
No, there are some other underlying things there that you've got to really unpack and get clear about.
Man. Ooh, dropping wisdom, man. Thank you so much for all of that.
Yes.
And something I heard the other day that kind of capitalizes on what you're talking about there. Anytime we're comparing ourselves, one of two things happens, right? Our ego is either blowing up or feeling less than. So,
Yeah,
I mean, that in itself, uh, I really love what you're saying as far as if you are going to look externally and, integrate with these tools that are out there in the world that are unavoidable at this point, look to it for inspiration, not intimidation as well, right? And it's
beautifully
okay
said.
to be inspired by people and be like, damn, that's dope. I want to do something like that. If it's
Absolutely.
waking something up in you, go for it, right? So,
Absolutely.
in a
Yeah.
healthy way. So,
Yeah, for sure.
I'm I'm curious, Corey, as far as like, the bigger vision you have, my man, and kind of the work you're doing and the impact on the world that you are looking to continue creating because you've already touched a lot of lives and including ours in this conversation. So thank you. And yeah, just curious, what's the bigger vision for you?
Sure. I'll give you a very vulnerable, raw, real life answer to that CJ knows this story. It's a short one. But several months ago, I had been sort of sought after to co-host a radio show, really popular radio show here in LA, and they were looking for a psychologist that could speak to all of the things that if you go to my social media, I speak to every day. So sort of a no-brainer made sense. I had no aspiration being a radio host, was not on my vision board. But I was excited for the opportunity. I was like, okay, this is dope. This will be a way for me to connect with a different audience beyond social media, right? Because contrary to popular belief, a lot of folks still listen to radio. A lot of folks do. Long story short, went through, several sort of personality tests and dummy questions to see how it would work or whatever. And I would have been the psychology voice of the show. The other two folks are popular radio DJs, disc jockeys in the music space. So anyway, ultimately they decided we don't want the serious psychology voice. We want this to be more pop culture, listeners call in, and then the two DJs can sort of sound off on their own life experiences and give some advice. I had maybe Jordan and CJ 20 seconds of like, oh man, like I was kind of excited about that. After those 20 seconds though, I felt so divinely redirected. And I don't, other than some of the things I shared at the top of this podcast interview about uh spirituality and my practices and just being grateful for opportunities, I really don't know beyond those modalities what gave me so much freedom in that. But to answer your question, what that did do was allow me to go back and pick up a dream that I had put down probably 15 years ago, which was to someday have my own talk show. So the very thing that they were inviting me to do on radio, I wasn't supposed to do with them or with those particular co-hosts. Like, I'm excited for them and I'm glad that they're able to go on and do that. And maybe I can chime in from time to time if they invite me as a guest. But it just, again, going back to the original point I made earlier about how media has always sort of fueled this imagination I have. I discovered very early on through, the Montel Williams and the Oprahs and, the Dr. Phils that, oh, there's a space for you in this. People already feel really comfortable, strangers just sharing their lives with you. What if you could impact people and embed some of the insights and things that into a more global audience? And so, future building goals, what I'm aspiring to do is to someday have the Dr. Corey show. So I'm sharing that with you all, the whole space with me, and then hopefully come on and be guest yourself. So how about that?
Hey, we hold that
Amazing.
space dearly. I sincerely, and I know I speak for Jordan in this, but we truly appreciate the vulnerability and the ability to express. Me and Jordan have talked about. That's you expressing, not explaining. You didn't explain anything there. That was expressing who you are and what your intentions are and your goals. So thank you for that. And this goes with that. So as we wrap this up, saying and knowing where Corey would the dreams are leading to, what valuable lessons can you impart on our listeners, whether it be continuing to instill practices and or be aware of social media, anything that you can impart, whether it be to speaking to your career or to the life side of this, that you could give our listeners, because you have a ton of wisdom, man.
Thank you, man. I would say that I want folks to be encouraged to, if you don't already know, to discover what your superpower is, because we all have it. I experienced Jordan's very quickly when I met him, and I had to like literally go off on a side message and say, "Hey, you do know like calming or being calm or calm is a superpower for you." You know, CJ, you have just this um relentless, energizing force to you. I've seen it with kids, I've seen it with peers. We all have that thing. And I think that it's important to know what your superpower is, because the world is going to try to rip that thing from you in many ways. And so if you know what it is, then you can fight. I'm obsessed with this new iteration of the X-Men that's on, and I'm so reminded of like, man, we're all X-Men in our own ways, where we all have a superpower that can be used for good. And to live life is to have some bad days. That's just how life is. But I think if you can tap into your superpower, and a lot of times it's not even going to be used for you. It's going to be used for the people that you're coming in contact with. And I think that's a beautiful thing. So getting to know or discovering what your superpower is going to be key. I'll use the solitude. Again, I think in a world where belonging is so important, and I don't want to shame or shun the idea of wanting to belong to a group or something bigger than yourself. There's also a lot of power in the solitude, in those moments of you sitting with your own thoughts, sitting with your own feelings and your emotions in love. And what I mean by that in love piece is not feeling like you've got to judge every thought and icky feeling that comes up for you, but just sitting with that and allowing it to teach you something. Those are just a couple of my parting tips I would share with folks.
Huge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just a couple tiny little things for the listeners there.
Corey, that is profound. As Jordan said, just a little bit of wisdom there. But Jordan, if you want to take us on home with Corey, because we do appreciate your time, we value you, but you have really illuminated a lot of places that can enhance our lives with social media, since it is such a used asset in our lives, and it's an asset if we choose to see it like that. So thank you.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, beyond grateful for your time, my friend. And another superpower I've learned about of yours today is just your generosity. I mean, you shared so much, and it just came straight from your heart, man. So we're just so grateful, and I'm safe to say our listeners are going to be grateful as well. So we'd love to have you back anytime, and we can't wait to support the Dr. Corey show once it's up and going. And peace and love to you, man. Always.
Thank you, brothers. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I look forward to connecting with you both in person real soon.
Thank you for joining us today on the Practicing People's podcast. We hope you found our conversation inspiring and thought-provoking. We appreciate your support and passion for personal growth and self-improvement.
To help build the Practicing People's community, please follow us on Instagram at Practicing People's Podcast for updates, behind-the-scenes content, and engaging discussions. Liking and sharing our posts will spread the word about the podcast to others who can benefit from these conversations. You can also reach out to us at our website, www.practicingpeoples.com for more materials and ways to tap into the community.
Leaving a rating and review on your preferred podcast platform is a valuable way to support us and help potential listeners discover our show.
Remember, personal growth is a journey we embark on together. Let's build a community where we uplift and inspire one another to achieve our true potential.
Thank you for being part of the Practicing People's podcast family. And until next time, keep practicing and keep growing.